Good afternoon to everyone who's joined us to today's book discussion. Today's book discussion is in collaboration with the Transformation Unit, the library, as well as the African Thought and Conversation. And we're talking about a book titled Witnessing: From the Rwandan Tragedy to Healing in South Africa. So this is also in celebration of Africa Month. I did just look at the snippets of the book, and it looks like an incredible book. It's got, beautiful reviews, and we are excited to hear the story that is shared by Pie-Pacifique Kabalira-Uwase, who wrote this beautiful book. I'm going to just take a moment to introduce our facilitator for today's session. Our facilitator today is Thami Pooe, who is the co-founder of Tshimong. Thami Pooe is a multi-passionate entrepreneur who is a co-founder of Tshimong and founding CEO of Engage Africa Media. An avid and decorated debater, Thami established Tshimong to equip today's children with 21st century competencies for career and citizenship. Thami is also passionate about Africa's opportunity to use media platform to educate, influence, and drive change. He has produced several debates-based TV and radio content and runs Afrocentric digital podcast network, Engage Africa Podcasts. I'm going to hand over to you, Thami, so that you introduce our panel members as well. So the floor is yours. We're looking forward to hearing your story and learning from you, Pie-Pacifique. Over to you, Thami.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You guys can clap me on, surely. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a huge honor and a privilege to be here hosting this conversation. As I was introduced, it's one of those things like you submit a bio and you're like, then they read it, then it gets longer and longer. You're like, no, not that great, but it's okay. It's okay. I'm here. I'm introduced. Welcome to this incredible conversation here that we're having in honor of Africa Month. I think it's very important that we contextualize the event that we're attending today, but more importantly, the context under which these conversations would be had. You see, the intention really, and I think this is something, the people that are in this audience are people that really understand this already, but it's always good to reiterate it for those who are tuning in, for the people that are actually coming in with the audience that I represent from Tshimong podcast perspective. It's important to understand that we're here to specifically, discuss issues regarding Africa Month. It's a month where we dedicate discursive time to the continent of Africa. It's a time where we think about the notion of Pan-Africanism, especially when it has tensions with South African exceptionalism. It's a time also where we have an opportunity to discuss two countries in particular. Of course, we have the continent at large to discuss, but I think our stories between Rwanda and South Africa are very similar. They're very similar in the sense that both of us come from a very long and arduous colonial past. Both of us come from countries that have a very arduous ethnic conflict past, ridden past. And both of us are countries that also had to undergo what is called transitional justice. So this conversation is really much about that. It's about reflecting about these two stories, reflecting about these two nations. But the point of departure really is the story of the author whose book you may actually have in your hands right now, right? And I have the absolute privilege to welcome our main panelist today, Mr. Pie-Pacifique Kabalira-Uwase. And he's going to be telling us his story, specifically taken from his book, Witnessing, from the Rwandan tragedy to healing in South Africa. Again, it's a trajectory that's very recognizable, especially as South Africans. We know what it means to come out of serious conflict, and we know what it means to embark on a journey of healing and eventual self-actualization. So all of these notions, all of these themes are the kind of things we'll be talking about as well. Also on the panel, we'll be joined by Professor Sphamandla Zondi, the director of the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. He'll also be on the discussion as well. He'll be tuning in online. And also, we would definitely encourage all of you guys that are in the audience right now to participate in the conversation. We really want to make it as engaging as possible. You know, it shouldn't just be the panelists that are really engaging in this rigor. You guys actually came here for the purposes of having a conversation and not just listening to us reflecting on these issues at large. And thank you very much. And I would like to introduce our main panelists today to come, you know, and address us, give us this journey from the tragedy of the Rwandan genocide to healing in South Africa. Mr. Pie-Pacifique, over to you.
Sorry, Thami, Prof. Zondi is available. Ne?
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Ever since this book was published, I've received a number of questions, and each time they actually help me understand my past and the past of my country and myself. I have to say, along this journey, I am still learning. So I like the way you contextualized it, because there's these parallels that one can draw between South Africa and Rwanda. Actually, when I submitted the first manuscript to the publisher, it didn't have the South African part. So the book ended when I leave Rwanda. And because that was the story I wanted to tell. That was the story I had intentionally decided that I want to witness myself. In a moment, I will talk about witnessing, because I think witnessing is beyond just being there. I think witnessing is an act of acknowledging and opening one's mind and heart to actually what happened. And I think it's something that doesn't have an end. We can continue witnessing intentionally throughout our lifetime. And so the publisher said, but you live in South Africa, and we've heard a little bit about your story about how you got here. And we think that people will read this book, will want to know where you are now. And so that's why some of the people who read the book, they will see that a lot of it is in Rwanda, and then the smaller part is outside of Rwanda.
Yeah.
And the other reason why I had chosen to do that actually is because the book, the part about Rwanda, in so many ways is not about me. It's about a lot of other people through my eyes as I was growing up. But when you get out of Rwanda, it's about me. It's what does this boy, what does this person become?
Yes.
And then so, and so I wanted to wrestle with, how do I make this book about others, and yet I'm called to now talk about me and what I have become. And so it's a tension that I held throughout the writing. Now, witnessing, of course, I was there, I was born in the country. Turns out one of the reasons where I talk about the tragedy of Rwanda, of course, the genocide of Tutsis was a massive tragedy for the entire continent, I think, in the history of humanity. And it's only one of the many tragedies that happened in that country. There are other tragedies that we have seen, and the only tragedies that I talk about are tragedies that I could bear witness to. I happen to have been born in a family that was politically active. My father was burgomestre, which is the equivalent of mayor. And as soon as I was born, then there were rumors of a coup d'etat, and then he's somehow connected to that. So he's in jail for state security related crimes, or at least suspected of. And then he's out, and then he's in again. So for the first 5 years of my life, I don't really have a father. And when he appears in my life, we don't actually know him. And my mother then goes through this period of helping him bond with us. And then 3 years later, he dies. And so, but I'm in an ordinary neighborhood. As an ordinary boy, I was relating some of the stories. In my neighborhood, all parents were your parents. I think it's the same in most African contexts, actually, where parents have the right to all children in the neighborhood. So my father then had also to be one of those parents at some point before he passed away. But as I was playing in the dusty streets of Muhima, which is a township in Kigali, I wasn't aware of the larger context. And my biggest complaint in life was that my father died before I came first in class. I mean, in primary school, because he had promised me a bicycle. That was my biggest problem in life. And even when I came first in school, I remember celebrating, but I also remember crying because this was the day I was going to have my bicycle. And so then as I grew up, I realized how much of a big deal it was for my mother, who was 35 when my father died. I'm 42 now, so I realize how young my mother was. So when I look back, this, if I may allow myself to call my mother, this woman is a widow at 35 with 3 children. And now she has to survive in this environment in which her family is suspected of being traitors because of the political profile of the late husband. Yes. And that's the environment that my mother was in. And so I remember moments in which she conveyed that she communicated that fear, but I was too young to really understand what was going on. And then, of course, after 1994, when the Rwandan Patriotic Front attacked the country, there was this Hutu and Tutsi, and we couldn't really run away from it. It's actually, since I've been living here in South Africa now for 20 years, I see the relations between different tribal groups and different ethnic groups, I want to say. It's much larger. And sometimes I draw parallels to what we were living at the time. Now, you can't, in a war situation in such a small country with only one radio station, which is the Radio Rwanda, it was called, we couldn't really run away from the Hutu-Tutsi kind of rhetoric, especially because now that I look back, whoever has the loudest mic defined what history, the history of Rwanda is. Yeah. So before 1994, the version of history we learned is completely different from the version of history that we would be taught now. And it actually saddens me that we don't have a history that we all agree on. This is what happened. But in all that, when April 1994 comes, the presidential plane was shot down. I was a schoolboy. I was in boarding school, but we were on Easter holidays. So it was a few days before my return to boarding school. And it was all, Rwanda was, there was some semblance of hope because there was Arusha Accords, they had been signed. Everybody was ready to go into this transition government. The United Nations had sent troops to oversee the creation of this transition government. The rebel soldiers had been allowed into the city. They had been given space to, guard their politicians. So it's when the presidential plane was shot, it was a huge surprise for a lot of people, but also not a surprise for some. But for a 13-year-old that I was, it was, one day it was a different world, and the next day it was, because nobody is going to tell a 13-year-old when you wake up in the morning, there will be gunshots and it will be a really dark day. And then the following day, people are going to be killing people. And sometimes the people you are familiar with killing people you are familiar with. It's tragic in itself. Yeah. But I had to, I was quite an excitable boy. So I had to go and also do some errands, buy vegetables, because we had to survive. My mother couldn't actually move. And I got to witness all of these things firsthand. And then, of course, there is what everybody else might have read about, the whole genocide. And then after that, we're thinking, well, great, it's a different country now, sure. But unfortunately, it wasn't for us, because I lost quite a few members of my family after 1994. Then it came to a point where my family said, you need to go. And I said, I won't go. This was a tension in the family that lasted a couple of years. Eventually, after my brother's death, my family, I remember this conversation, my mother saying, I love you, and I would feel much more comfortable knowing that you are safe somewhere far away than close to me, because I don't want to lose you the same way I lost your brother. That in itself is a tragedy that a mother has to literally say, I love you, so therefore go. Sure. The absurdity of that is quite evident. But then I had to leave the country. Things didn't happen as I wished. I wanted to go to Canada. I ended up in a family that literally took the money from me that I was intending to use to go to Canada. And then I decided I'm going to go to Madagascar. Went to Mozambique looking for a way to go to Madagascar. I couldn't find one. Ended up in Maputo with only two options. Go to the refugee camp in Bobole or go to South Africa. And I chose, I was persuaded to come to South Africa. So that's the journey. And in South Africa, of course, I'm 20. I'm now in the streets of Durban. And there's a Rwandan community, but what can they do? They can only show me how they survive. So they are car guards, right? Most of them. And I had been to the University of Rwanda for a couple of months. So I was like, oh, students, become a car guard? Just there was something really humbling about it. Yeah. I resisted it for some time. But then engineers and teachers and former politicians and military officers and mothers and fathers, and they were all car guards. Sure. And some of them were sending their children to primary school and some secondary school with money they made from car guarding. So I had to make peace with it. And then I had to fight with the systems, particularly the University of Natal at the time, to get in. The last thing about this university I want to share with you is that I used to be a car guard outside of the university. You have a student card, everybody, most of you, right? When you swipe your turnstiles, it makes noise. Right? When I was a car guard outside, that was the noise I was looking forward to. But I was looking forward to being the one swiping that card. And the day I got it, it was a temporary card because I still didn't have a financial aid package. It was a temporary card because I had to go to Lens and all these places. I couldn't believe it. I went in, I swiped, and it cracked and clanked, and I went in and I went in again, and I turned twice, and then I went home. Because I was the one swiping the card. Yeah. And then the university had highs and lows, but I was privileged to be awarded the Mandela Rhodes Scholarship. Any Mandela Rhodes Scholar here? Hopefully future Mandela Rhodes Scholars. Right? And then I have a degree in physics, but my professional career started in banking, and eventually I left banking so I can really make a difference that on my own terms, literally. That's why I left banking. And here I am now. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. That I'm going to introduce, Prof. Zondi to also make some remarks regarding the conversation that we're having here. In fact, Prof. Zondi was supposed to host this conversation, so I have hijacked your seat, sir, but it's all good. And from his perspective, really just talk about some of the things that we hear from Pie-Pacifique, specifically regarding this journey, through immigration and migrating out of a country in conflict. Because I believe as South Africans, especially here in this country, really, it's a notion that we really undermine, right? The status of being a refugee, the status of being stateless, so to speak, and the privileges that come from, existing at home, being economically active at home, right? And making a way to prosper for yourself at home with the people that you know, love, and cultures that you're very familiar with. So, Prof. Zondi, from your side, please really just give us some remarks. And then I'm also going to introduce Ms. Sakile Marcia Ntabeni as well. She's also going to be putting in a little bit of her opinion as well with regards to this conversation. It's a multi-layered, multi-generational conversation that we're having here today. Over to you, Prof. Zondi. You can clap for him too.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated, and apologies that I couldn't be physically there to witness the young man who learned to eat fat cook very early, who learned to dribble the mother as much as he was dribbling the ball, and the boys with the ball in the street of a street that led to nowhere. Getting to witness the boy who teachers thought he was the best behaved boy, and that the mother thought was the most ill-disciplined boy, and therefore had two images of himself. But definitely a boy who is a storyteller at the very beginning and grows to become a storyteller author that produces this boy, this book. A boy whose adulthood was achieved through an experience of history he did not participate in. A history, in a way, his own father, who died tragically in all of this, did not fully participate in. But the outcomes of it, the ramifications of it, he would have to participate in. A boy who would then go on to live with that legacy of what would confuse him at the very beginning of his teenagehood, when he would ask his mother, "No, man, we are Hutu, and this government is Hutu. So why are you terrified, Mom? Why are you fearful about what is happening?" And then gets to understand how various identities work in different ways. On one end, you are Hutu, so you should be safe, and the Tutsi must be unsafe. But on the other hand, you are a Hutu who has been disowned by fellow Hutu because you are associated with a man blamed for an attempted coup on government in Rwanda. And therefore his father himself, Pie-Pacifique's father, had to carry on his shoulder a history that was not his making. He was just a friend of a person who was just a human being and a citizen, a fellow Hutu, who would then be involved in political activities that had nothing to do with his father. But his father, by virtue of his relationship, which become ethnic relationship, becomes a collateral damage to a war he probably had very little knowledge about. And then Pie-Pacifique himself, born into that family, working and playing with older boys, and having differences only on the basis of your skill in football and the basis of your how you work with others, whether you are the best goalkeeper, like the famous Cameroonian goalkeeper, the goalkeeper boy projected himself as, oh, you were able to score goals or not get goals, which is the function of being a functional human being, a human being who plays their role in a community of human beings. It started to change meaning because in the football field, it was exciting, it was great. But then it got disrupted by the sounds and barrel of the gun on one occasion. And the sound of a barrel of a gun came from a society outside the football community of exciting life of boys, came from a society that was always there, but the boys did not fully understand what was happening, which is why Pie-Pacifique is happy, his mother is worried all the time, but there's nothing obvious in the environment that causes Pie-Pacifique's mother to be worried. It is simply that his mother had lived long enough to know that there are gathering clouds, there are clouds shifting position around the community, though it looks fine where they are, but there are gathering dangers that are taking place. And how does the mother know this? Enters another tool. It's the radio. Radio Rwanda, the radio of the land of 1,000 hills, is communicating to the mother what is happening outside this veneer of normality. It is therefore conveying to her an impending danger that is coming. But the boys don't know that danger. That is why, in the midst of huge worry in the society, the boys are happy. The boys are going about their normal life and elder. Then their happiness gets disrupted when a radio announcement indicates that the rebels have infiltrated Rwanda and all of that. This does not make sense to the boy because he learned from history that Rwanda is not the Rwanda you have now, but the Rwanda is a big land, and that Rwanda is a part of Uganda, is a part of the Congo. Rwanda is a land of people who came all the way from Chad, but it's also people who came all the way from the east. And therefore, Rwanda should not be infiltrated because Rwanda belongs to everyone. It's not some small little place. So that history that has been told in schools, which is about the pre-colonial experiences, that history did not remind him that the colonial order had changed what Rwanda is from an original Rwanda, which was open to all, which was ever expanding, which was the home of 1,000 hills and therefore thousands of possibilities, to a mere colony for a small group of people who must now be defined by society as Hutu or Tutsi. He doesn't tell us in this book, but the story that he's born into is a story of a nefarious change of a reality, of a people who are people who now must know themselves as Hutu or Tutsi or Twa. And these are a people for whom these identities were not fixed and codified and written into laws. For a long time, until the Belgians came and the missionaries codified it, being Hutu could be temporary and being Tutsi could be temporary because you could move from being a cattle herder to being a hunter, from a agriculturalist to another thing. So you existed on the basis of the choices you are making, and your expectations from society, a Kenya Rwanda society, was that you will make of yourself in this land of thousands of fields what you wish to. But under colonialism, that changed. You did not have an identity you choose, but you had an identity now that is inscribed into you, which is why the poet doesn't understand. We are Hutu. The government is Hutu, supposed to be a place of safety, but that is not safety for us. But the boy probably does not understand, why should a Tutsi also be unsafe in this environment? But he got to see it as he realizes some of the relatives that have gone into places, got into a football field, and the soldiers encamped on them, detained them in the field, keep them in the field, and they now have to produce a thing that the boy did not know was necessary. It's called the identity card. It's a mere card. Now that must now give sense to who you are, whereas in his world until that point, how well you play the football, how well you relate with others, how well you contribute to this beautiful football field that has been made out of a street, was all that you needed to express your identity as a fellow human being who is a useful human being. Now they have to produce this thing called a card, which does not exist in the pre-colonial, but exists in the colonial, but in the post-colonial does not exist to a boy who has not learned the colonial system and the modern state system that were imposed upon the people. So there's so many layers that interact with each other in this whole story. I'm very fascinated by the story of upbringing and the story of the trauma that the mom experiences, and the story of the trauma that the father experiences, and the father ends up passing away at the hands of a state system that is confused about who it is, and confused about identity, and confused about what it means to be a fellow citizen, and what gives you a right to live or not to live. A story of coexistence of tranquility in pockets, in the midst of a surrounding that is haunted by danger, and danger that comes from man-made challenges. It is a beautiful story, in my view, of how society is changed by men. There's mostly men, not much women are shown here to imbibing certain thinking about what it means to be human beings, and using that to cause trauma on others and cause trauma on each other, and therefore disrupt a tranquility of a growth of a Rwanda with a terrible civil war that leads and coups and mayhem that leads to a genocide that takes place and completely disrupts society and creates a permanently new society, and almost like that serene that disrupts the boys as they play their football. So this is a book really about how you could understand Rwanda and how Rwanda changed from the perspective of a legally innocent boy, getting from his mother a good understanding of how confusing, how absurd, how foolish, and how inhumane the system is around them. It is also a story of post-colonial Africa as a whole, because it can be replicated in many parts of the world. It is also a story of resilience and attempts by this young man to make something of himself in the midst of it all. And that is why the boy, with all of this, migrates, ends up in South Africa, and when in South Africa, makes the most out of the little he can find from the street, being a car guard and stuff like that, and creates something out of himself and ends up with a scholarship, serious one, a scholarship named after a man called Mandela, whose life principally is about giving us a message that it is all possible if you can defy the odds of the system and try to make the most out of it. I invite all of us to read this book to understand what it means to be a resilient society in a confusing world with systems that are meant to destroy, to kill, and to disrupt. Congratulations, Pie-Pacifique, for inspiring us with your witnessing and told very beautifully. Thank you for reminding us that storytelling is one of the greatest ways to heal society. It's one of the greatest ways to show us the way. One of the greatest ways to Africanize, to decolonize, to depatriarchize. For on this basis, at the base of the stories told, we may give birth to a new South Africa, in which a new Africa, in which 1,000 years would give us possibilities to look at 1,000 options we have to make a life a little better. Congratulations again. I wish you all the best with this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Zondi. I think those are really powerful words, right? And again, it reminds us about the point of departure of this discussion. The point of departure is based on a story. And I think I really enjoy what Prof. Zondi is saying about it's inherently about a story about existing as a human being. That's it. A story told through the lens of maybe a 13-year-old boy. A story told from the experiences of playing soccer within that specific moment. But again, you know, a boy can quickly, in any country, a boy can quickly become a political token, can quickly become a political point of contention and a political point of conflict. And that boy who was just playing soccer could quickly become a refugee, trying to resuscitate his sense of humanity and his sense of boyhood, right? And that's truly like the way I want us to reflect about Pie-Pacifique's story, right? Is that when we think about the African continent at large, when we think about the different attempts to sow divisions from a colonial impositional point of view, and when we think about ourselves as political agents and political animals, we are doing a disservice to our inherent humanity. Because this story is about conflict to healing, to very, very human experiences. Because after that healing comes a fact of self-actualization that everyone here in this room is coming to the University of Johannesburg to enjoy. Because we are all here, because we are ambitious. And maybe our pasts, our political past, and the political baggage that we enter into this institution with, because you entered the University of Natal with political baggage. You were, you know, a car guard outside of that university space with political baggage. Baggage that is precluding you from self-actualizing and surviving in the first instance. So speaking about this notion really about self-actualization as a human being traveling through the continent of Africa, who comes to Johannesburg also to seek opportunities, I'd like to introduce international students, Sakile Marshantabeni from Zimbabwe. And I think from her perspective, I really think it's going to be important as well to contextualize the contemporary experience of a student here at the University of Johannesburg, particularly an international student. Because again, Zimbabwe, like South Africa, like Rwanda, comes with political baggage, right? But I think it's going to be important for you to tell your story so that we can address that political baggage and you are the human first. And we experience your story from a human perspective, and then we can have fun with some of the political notions a bit later. Introducing Sakile.
Good afternoon, everyone. Why did they make me speak last? Because now, speaking after such great people who have already spoken, I don't even know what to say. But it's such an honor to be invited to speak with such great people. First of all, I want to say that concerning the book, it's quite an interesting book. I haven't read all of it. I just read the prologue. And from just reading the prologue, it was such an interesting story to see how, what I got from that prologue is how when you put your mind into something, you can actually achieve it, irregardless of the background, irregardless of the situations around, you can still make it. As for me, I'm an international student doing my second year in operations management at DFC. So seeing that I'm only but doing my second year, I don't have much to tell, but I believe that I did my high school in 2016 back in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
And I only started university last year, that is 2021. Which means I had to take a 4-year gap, which I didn't want to take. But the circumstances, the politics, as Thami said, they pushed me to take that 4-year gap.
Sure.
So coming here to South Africa, first of all, I didn't have the information. In 2017, I enrolled at a university back in Zimbabwe. But then I just left and then came this side, without having the information that you first have, you need documents, you need a study permit, you need to convert your results. So I just packed my bags and I just dropped out.
Yeah.
So when I got here, I applied at UJ. I got the place, but they said, now that you have gotten the place, produce your study permit,
Sure.
produce your documents. And I was like, what documents? I have my high school results.
Sure.
So it then took me back to now start with the application process. By the time I was done, the registration period was over. Tried applying the following year, but it doesn't work that way that you come and say, I had gotten the place last year. Can I just get my place back?
Right.
You start from scratch. That was the second year. Third year, I'm like, let me just leave UJ. I tried applying to different universities.
Sure.
And to no luck, I didn't get responses. And then the fourth year, I'm like, let me go back to UJ because it was my initial choice.
Yes.
And lucky enough, this time around, I got accepted. So it has been a journey that has taught me that in life, because at a certain point, I wanted to give up. I'm like, I can't keep on applying and not getting responses. The next time you don't have a permit, you need this, you need that. So at a certain point, I was like, I'm not gonna do this anymore. I'm just gonna drop this varsity thing.
Sure.
And then somehow I find myself applying again and I got accepted. So relating to the prologue that I read,
Yeah.
I got that if you are resistant enough, if you push, if you don't give up, you eventually get the results. And as an international student, there are levies that you need to pay. You need to pay for your medical aids and all those costs. So when I got accepted, I got the tuition, everything. I calculated, I'm like, so much money. And coming from Zimbabwe, the economy is not quite good. Even with both parents working,
Yeah.
they cannot sustain paying for you, the fees, the accommodation, everything else. But I've always been a student that works very hard. So I told myself that I'm just gonna put in the work. If I fail along the way, then I'm gonna give up. And lucky enough, well, I didn't get a Rhodes Scholarship, but I got a bursary merit. So lucky enough, I was lucky to get a bursary merit so I can be able to continue. With the little time that I've had to be in South Africa, I've learned that in this era, if the era that we are in, coming from as an international student, you are pushed to work more than normal because you remember where you come from. Every time you want to slack, you remember the situation back home. Sure. That is the one thing that is going to push you. And at a certain, it was 2019 when I had given up on the application, I went to work in a restaurant as a waitress. I didn't last because every time I got those ill treatments, I'll be like, do you know that I'm supposed to be at varsity right now? I don't deserve this kind of treatment. Yeah. And growing up, I always wanted to be a doctor, you understand? Yeah. So when I got that treatment, I felt like, do you know that I wanted to be a doctor and I can still be a doctor? Sure. Because I also applied for nursing. I've been young as I am because I'm only 24. But what I've went through, one day I'm also gonna write a book. And then also when I got accepted that in 2021, yes, I also got accepted in Zambia. Because at a certain point I was like, maybe I'm not supposed to be in South Africa. Sure. So I applied in Zambia and I actually got accepted to study a bachelor in medicine. So now it was a conflict to say, should I stay here? I've been here for 4 years. Or should I go to Zambia, a new country, start from the ground? And here it was better because at least I had relatives. Right. I had people that I had already been staying with, even if when I wasn't working. So now going to Zambia, it was going to be a different story. I need to start from the ground again. But it's what I've always wanted to do. But I ended up saying, let me stay here and see what South Africa has for me. So I want to say to everyone who is here, can you go and read the book? I believe I'm also going to continue reading the book because the small part that I read, I related to most parts and I was like, I think this book was written for me. Sure. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I believe that as an individual, each and every one of us have a story to tell. And our stories are very different. That makes it your story. Because it is different, only you can tell it. Absolutely. Like it is his story, only he. Yes, someone else might have a different perspective that, no, I grew up with you and I know this and that, but it is your story and you only can tell it the way that you want to tell it. So thank you so much, Thami, for the platform to speak to you beautiful people. Thank you.
So right now, we're getting into the more chilled part of the discussion. It is I'd say the panel discussion between us. And of course, the audience, please feel free. I'm going to open up a round of questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I appreciate it. My name is Sipamanda Zondi. We appreciate it.
Yes, Prof. Zondi, I think we can definitely hear you. Just repeat that. He may not have been speaking to us. He's a busy man, so he'll be speaking to us, it's fine. It's all good. It's all good, it's a busy man. So I'm going to be opening a round of questions from the audience just now, right? And I think, again, it's the temptation, and this is just me, right? I think I've got this proclivity, like the temptation is to go like heavy with the political notions, right? We could really like go to town with transitional justice in Rwanda and how it went with the Arusha Accords and all those kinds of things, and we can really take it to town in Zimbabwe as well. You know what I mean? After the tragedies in 1985 and really the kind of precarity that exists from an ethnic point of view. We can do that if you want to, but I think it's better that we really take on the momentum that came from the inspirational stories of all of the speakers that they have brought forth within this conversation right now. Because I think the burden that Mr. Pie-Pacifique's story comes with is a burden of universality, as you were saying, right? You read the prologue, you were like, yeah, this is this has a lot to do with me. This has a lot to do with me. And might I add, many South Africans as well, whether you from outside of the province or outside of the economic confines that were structurally made to exclude Black people, right? You know the story of resilience and what it means to study at the University of Johannesburg and what it means to self-actualize. And I think my one question to Pie-Pacifique is, talk to me about the moment you felt like you have self-actualized. Because there's a moment that you arrive at of healing. You come to South Africa, you do the Mandela Road Scholarship, you become an ABSA graduate, and you work into banking and all those kinds of things. When was the point at which you had said to yourself, you know what, from the traumas that my parents experienced, my family experienced, and my country has experienced, and the traumas that I brought in, carrying into this country, I have healed? When was that? And maybe just give us that, just give us a window into that moment of clarity and why it was so important for you.
So the key word here is healing.
Healing.
Healing. And I have to say that one of the reasons why the book took so long after I had promised to write is because there was doubt in me as to whether I have healed enough.
Sure.
And I think the trick there was enough. You know, what is healing enough? But the moment, I can pick one of the moments, is the moment when I was lying on the floor and I'm in tears and there's snot and sweat and I open my eyes and I see these human beings looking at me with so much love that I had never experienced before. And look at them, and in their eyes, I can see so many other people, the people that I have met in my past, and people in the memories that I was processing.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking, I am here too. I am here. And I will never forget that moment. And then there is, you know, some people talk about unconditional love. It was a moment when I experienced it, when I made a phone call to Rejoice, Mary Joyce,
yes,
the scholarships manager at the Mandela Roads Foundation. And I was expecting a lot of heartache reaction. I was expecting a kind of disappointment. I was expecting a pushback to reality as it was, because I was conveying bad news.
Right, right.
And on the other end, she says, P, we love you.
Sure.
And it was the complete opposite of what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And that was a moment when I know that every time I look back, I know there's such a thing as unconditional love. Sure. Why are these two moments linked? It's because I got to a point where I can say I am and not need to add anything else and actually feel completely full. And sometimes I get it, sometimes I lose it. Right? Sometimes I get it and I have this compulsion and obligation to add something after it, you know, and it's this thing of wanting to become all the time.
Absolutely.
And when I go to the point where I can say I am, my heart is full, and then I have had experience of being loved regardless, I know that I am, and I am loved. And so I keep going to moments like that when I talk about my own healing. And I have to say, sometimes I have it, sometimes I lose it.
Oh yeah.
And this is the human condition, and I think it's like our heartbeat, you know, it absolutely it comes and goes. But I think it's up to me how much time of my life I spend in that space of I am, sure, and I don't need to become, sure. And so it's a long way to answer that. It's
No, for
many
sure.
moments, but those are the moments that I'm reaching.
That's so powerful. I really hope the audience has an appreciation for that notion. I am, right? Because the first thing you said that struck me, and I kept like quoting, right? I am here too, right? So meaning, and I think you say it came from the moment where you felt recognized and seen by the other human beings around you in that moment. And that was a moment of clarity for you. It was at least a checkpoint for your healing journey. Right? It was you saying, man, I am. Because I think part of brokenness, and I can imagine part of the brokenness that comes with political conflict and conflict in general and turmoil and precarity and all those kinds of things, is the loss of existence. Right? Because you're in a country that's confused about your identity or isn't too happy about your identity, and you enter another country that sees your identity as foreign, and therefore you're constantly erased and a shadow of selves.
Or even sometimes that denies you the right to define your own identity.
Oh my goodness.
Because we actually have that in our world.
Absolutely.
We have countries that deny you the right to define your own identity. And for me, it's one of the greatest tragedies, because a lot of people actually eventually believe it, that they are not, unless,
Absolutely.
And that is, when we talk about self-actualization, for me, that's really what is at the heart of the matter.
Absolutely. Sure. And what you say, about like, I am, and just to repeat that part, right? It's like the notion of Ubuntu. We understand Ubuntu as, in English, I am because you are. And I think that that's such a beautiful tension, right? In our conception of being on the African continent. It was the moment you experienced unconditional love from another person, right? And it was a moment where you were like, okay, cool, my existence is now sufficient in this very moment. Sure, that's really, really powerful. Let me throw it to Prof. Zondi. Prof. Zondi, are you still with us, sir? Okay, not really.
Yes,
not
yes,
really.
I am there. I am
He
here.
is. All right, thank you very much. So let me throw it to you, Prof. Zondi. I think, there's an interesting opportunity here quickly to also speak about, the South African transitional experience as well, right? I think, I think really transitional experiences across the continent, because, we also hear from Saikile an experience from Zimbabwe as well. We are post-colonial nations. We are nations that still, in many ways, experience ethnic conflict. We still experience xenophobia. And there are so many, tensions that exist in our society right now that limit our ability to see each other as human beings. So can you just maybe comment on maybe two things for me? The advent of transitional justice in these countries, and has it worked for the human beings on the ground, the attempts at which from TRC to Arusha courts, etc. And also, some of the social limitations that we adapt ourselves to as people around notions of identity, superiority and inferiority complexes that we throw at each other and weaponize each other's identities to divide each other. I just want you to, it's a mouthful, but I'd like a mouthful from you.
Rwanda is an interesting case to use, but I think Pie-Pacifique should help us do that, to understand the multiple transitions that are taking place.
Yes.
So that the post-colonial is not just one transition, it's many transitions continuously taking place. Zimbabwe knows that many transitions taking place. For example, look at Zimbabwe, the first transition for the first 10 years, quite smooth actually. with good outcome, which is why the Zimbabweans have continued to be the one of the most proficient set of human beings in this region, because of the investment made to education, to health, to social security, to stability in the first 10 years, which goes on for a further 5 years. So that first 15 years is pretty solid. And then things turn for worse in the next 15 years, so that we can divide into 2 15 years. We make a mistake of making the last 15 years a more significant change than the first 15 years. Hold on. Take Rwanda. Rwanda, after colonialism, it has a brutal transition thereafter. It not given a chance to stabilize at all. It ends in a tragedy. It's tragedies after tragedies and after tragedies. We talk about the genocide as the biggest one, but it is not the only one. There are many tragedies that affected both sides, if you have two sides in Rwanda. And at the end of the last tragedy they had in 1994 was at a time when we were coming out of our own tragedy in South Africa of apartheid. Their trajectory, with all the weaknesses they have, has been a very positive one in their case. Stability economically, stability socially, to the point where Rwanda, is part of its size, has become a significant African power. But it's a very small country. Because it had a strong leader who decided to look away from that out of pain, crafted a system that's more developmental, and it stabilized. And I've been to Kigali several times. It well-functioning state and society and all of that. It's fragile too, because there are some who say without Kagame, it will not be sustained, and all of that. So this transition, therefore, in Rwanda, it's a negative, terribly negative, which has turned to a little bit more positive. It's got its own weaknesses, but it has gone positive. And in our case, it has turned from it has turned quite negative. I mean, in South Africa has been battling to manage its transition in a manner that improves the quality of people. Zimbabwe turns very positive for first 15 years, and then turned very negative thereafter. So when we talk about post-colonial transition, we're talking about transitions, and many of them are moving in all manner of direction. It's not only bleak, but it's sometimes bleak with a positive, sometimes it's a positive that turns into bleak. And all of that, but in all of them, there's a common story. Human factor, the resilience of human beings, and it enabled all of this. Look at the Zimbabwean one. The resilience of the Zimbabweans as a human being is that which has caused Zimbabweans to go into Zambia a lot more than the first, and then went to Botswana and came to South Africa and to Mozambique to maintain a sense of being and make a life out of it. That's the resilience of the people in the face of the cruelty of the leaders. Similarly, the story of Pie-Pacifique is indeed about that. How he makes himself. Here he makes himself through migration and all of it. And how leaders under Kagame makes the best out of Rwanda when they remain behind and make it. That's human resilience itself too. All of it has and the fact that South Africa has stayed this way, it's also human resilience, the sense of hope, the pockets of excellence that are all over, that are the basis for the rise of South Africa in future. Again, there's hope because of what you see, what I see in front of me, even on the screen, there's great hope. But in that hope, there's also a major problem. Many of our situations have remained bad because the people are resilient. Mugabe could have left 10 years earlier, but because of the resilience of the Zimbabweans, they gave a veneer of stability to what was a crisis. So they didn't allow the situation to appear to be really where it was. So sometimes bad leaders require resilient people, because the resilient people make things look like they are normal. That's the only danger we have. Thank you very much. Let the conversation continue as we discuss transitions at IPAC very soon. Thank you very much.
Very, very powerful point. Just like the dichotomy of what the outcome of resilience, right? Resilience can be an incredible thing. Resilience means survival, but resilience also means that the wrong regimes survive. So that's a very powerful point. So look, you guys at UJ know me. I'm notorious for making these things run over time. I must apologize already, right? However, I still want to squeeze in some questions, right? At least 2 questions, right? So from the audience, please, are there any questions to any of our panelists, to Sakile, to Prof. Zondi, to Pie-Pacifique, specifically regarding their stories, but also maybe their opinions about some of the other macro-political issues that we also seem to enjoy talking about? Are there any questions from the audience's perspective? Or are you just blessed and just saying amen the whole time? Any questions? Yes, yes. Please state your name. Please be as loud as possible as well so the microphones can capture you, because this beautiful facility has microphones all over the place. So we want to be able to hear you.
So I'm Catherine.
Yes, Catherine, hi.
I'm bad at memorizing names. And Sir sitting on a couch.
Yes, yes, yes. Pie-Pacifique.
I have
Can you stand up, please, so that you can be louder?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's because she's sitting on those study chairs and it's a bit of a mission to stand up. I feel you.
Okay, first I have to comment that I am so motivated by the story. And then I have a question for you. Do you think the political surroundings around your upbringing shaped your perspective on the concept of humanity today?
Sure. So I just want to repeat the question for the audience at home, right? So you say, do you think that the context of your political surroundings have shaped your conception of what it is to be human today? Yes, sir.
The short answer is yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is because as I reflect, I think politics is just one of the many ways we express or experience human condition.
Sure, absolutely.
The human condition. Because politicians, sometimes you hear about bad or good politicians.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, these are people whose fears or excitements or expectations are going to trigger something. And because of the place they are accorded in society, whatever they do has wider implications for a lot of people.
Sure.
But it comes from a human being. And so sometimes this is actually one of the things that allowed me to open my heart to politicians, including those that I would say in my own political perspective, this is a bad politician and this is a good politician, including here in South Africa, because I see it happening. Sometimes I hear rhetorics that end up becoming incitements that hopefully will never get to the point where they can no longer be controlled.
Yeah.
Because you can get to that point where inciting people can no longer be controlled.
Sure.
And you find that the politicians are the first ones to distance themselves from the implications of what they were saying. So I didn't mean that. It's not what you meant. It's what they made of it. But that too is human.
Sure.
Yeah, the interpretation of what we are experiencing is at the heart of our humanity. And then I think the interpretation scientists, of course, will trace it back to our need to survive. We need to interpret the surroundings so we can make certain decisions.
Yes.
We have not evolved from that. We are still in that environment, except the jungle now is a political jungle. Right? So yes, the answer to your question is definitely yes.
Thank you very much. So I've got 2 more questions, which I'm going to have to wrap up at 2 more questions, unfortunately. Yes, sir. Remember, stand up, nice and loud, give us your name, question concise, to either one of the panelists on stage. Yes.
I have a question with regards to a remark that you made that we are a post-colonial nation.
Right.
So how can we go to being a post-colonial nation before decolonization or without entering that process of decolonization? Thank you.
Excellent question. I think I'm going to throw that question over to Prof. Zondi. And the question is, Prof. Zondi, we are apparently a post-colonial nation, and we are apparently post-colonial nations, but how can we be defined as post-colonial nations if we haven't entered into a rigorous process of decolonization? Very big question there, sir. Thank you very much. Hey, that's a head scratcher. Hey, this guy.
That's when you know you are at the university.
Yeah, you
know. Program director, but this meeting belongs to Pie-Pacifique. Why is the most difficult question given to a mere respondent, not the main speaker, the main thinker, the main storyteller? I want to say I agree with whatever Pie-Pacifique is going to say in answer to this question in advance. I fully agree. I say amen to what
amen.
But I will only add one element to it.
Right.
It seems to me we should all understand that colonization came in stages, and in most cases took 100 years to complete. And therefore, decolonization might also have to come in stages and phases, and it might take more than 2 generations to complete. But each generation has to contribute to it. And Pie-Pacifique is contributing to it here by writing that story and writing it genuinely with his mother fully immersed in the story, and with his father fully immersed in his story, and with his ordinary unknown Rwandans fully immersed in the story, and Kagas fully immersed in the story, and making all of them great participants in their story. Because colonialism would have taught him that he must write a story in the first person as himself. Secondly, he must be objective in that story. In other words, remove all the emotional parts and remove all the nice, oh, sorry part and all that. He must just be a cold academic and write a story on the basis of some theory that must have been created in Germany and all of those things. So he must not come to the story as himself and present himself, because he must leave himself out and present himself as an author, something that he is not. Because an author is an it, but Pie-Pacifique is a him. And therefore an author is a thing, and Pie-Pacifique is a human. When he brings that human in a story, he's decolonizing story, which is why I said to him, the whole thing is about storytelling. It's not about authorship. Because one of the things colonialism did to us was to rob us of our ability to tell a story. Yet we are products of stories told by the grandmothers and the grandfathers. And we have now been taught to teach that art of the grandmother and the grandfather, so that I become an ancestor that my kids may never recognize. So Pie-Pacifique has just demonstrated us how to do it. And my dear fellow respondent also did it. When she was asked to respond to this story, she told a story that amplifies this story. Now I have a dilemma. Program director, I apologize. Because I'm now going to say, perhaps in a year or 2, we will now be launching her story that she told a summary of it now in words. And that story needs to be converted into writing. I congratulate you in advance for the book that is coming in a year's time. Thank you, Pacifique, for stimulating it. we are decolonizing the space. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Zondi. Excellent
I'm willing to be a reader for that. I'm willing to promote that book. I'm willing to support its publication. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Excellent question. Yes. Excellent question. And I think, really decolonization is a spectrum process. We are all participants. And I think we need to disabuse ourselves of this notion that there are always these elite people in elite structures and elite institutions that advocate and agitate for the work of decolonization, right? You asking that question, that inquiry, the fact that it's in your head is the beginning of the process of decolonization for you, from you. You see what I'm saying? So that's very, very important, right? Last question, I think I had a hand up. Yes, ma'am. Remember, nice and loud, nice and proud, and give us your name as well. Direct the question to anyone in the audience before they give us their closing remarks.
My name is Oratile. And I'm struggling with accepting or dealing with failure as a person. And I always ask people this question. So I want to know, Guti, how did you keep on going? I understand people say, yes, and I kept on going, but how? When you had circumstances or whatever, obstacles that distracted your path. And my another question is, despite the background of Zimbabwe, where you're coming from, what kept you going exactly?
Absolutely, very good question. So, in spite of failure, what may seem to be inevitable, what kept you going? How did you continue? Let's start with Sakile, and then what I'm going to ask you to do, Sakile, as well, is to also include your closing remarks. Then I'm going to ask Prof. Zondi to chime in after Sakile with his closing remarks. And then I'm going to ask Pie-Pacifique to give us his closing remarks, but also answering that question, because I'm also pretty sure you'd also want to hear from your perspective. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. First of all, what kept me going personally, it was the idea that I always had a dream, like I said, to become a doctor.
Yeah.
So in high school, I did sciences. So I had a coat. I still have that lab coat at home.
Yeah. Wow.
So I used to wear that lab coat and be like, do I really want to quit this?
Wow.
That is one thing that kept me going. Even when I registered for a different course altogether. Yeah. In my mind, I was like, next year, I'm going to shift into the medical spectrum because that is where I've always wanted to go. So I had this idea in my head that I didn't want to shake off. Even now, I'm still trying to shake it off. That girl, doing operations management, get in the groove, do what you're now doing because you're still doing it the way that you're going to do the medical field.
Absolutely.
And then as for my closing, I want to say, I believe this book, Witnessing, the title itself, it has the power to heal. I believe many people are going to tap into it. It's going to heal a lot of us, including me, myself. When I got the invitation, hi, Saki, we're looking for an international student to speak. I was like, okay. And then I saw the speakers that are going to be there. I came back, I'm like, no, not to this big, guys. I'm not going to do it, guys. Look for another person. They're like, no, please, you just say anything. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, because this story, I believe is going to change a lot of lives. Thank 100%.
You. Some closing remarks from Prof. Zondi. Before we get to our main speaker.
Pie-Pacifique, we need to distill from your story other stories. In my world, we do this thing, and we call it pinky promise. So pinky promise, we are going to distill this and all that. So pinky promise. Are you not going to pinky promise?
Please, pinky promise. No, it's you too.
Pinky promise. So we're going to have to distill that story because there are about 15 different stories in your book that needs to be distilled. Let's have a conversation going forward. My dear sister, Let's hear from you when your book is coming. And fellow audience, each one of you have your stories. Let's gain the boldness colonialism robbed us to simply write your story. As D. Bigo said, write what you like. Don't care damn what anybody says. Just tell your story. Before long, as Kwesi Pra reminds us, your story must be real to your village. Its international implications will find itself. I'll repeat it again. Your story must be real to your world, where you are, your village, your specific section of your village. Its international implications will only just follow. We don't write for international audience. We write to tell a story. Tell your story, African. That's what we're waiting for. Thank you for showing us, Pie-Pacifique, that it can be done without much difficulty. Well done.
And let's hear from our main speaker, Mr. Pie-Pacifique. So answering that question on failure, I think it's a very important question. But also your closing remarks, your parting shot to everyone that's attended today and the people that have also attended online as well.
Well, let me start by saying, actually, this is, it's something that myself, when I say it and when I remember it, it helps me to sober up. You know, for everything that I write in that book, especially things that would be considered as bad.
Yeah.
I know somebody who has had it worse.
Yeah.
And much worse.
Yeah.
And so this is really it's our humanity. This is what I want to say. And for example, one aspect is I applied once and I got in, even without the papers and financial aid and all of that. And I got in. She had to do it how many times?
Yeah.
You know, again and again and again. Sure. You see what I'm trying to say. And I'm looking forward to reading that book too.
Yeah.
And Prof, I actually didn't realize you were promising me. I thought we were promising the book. So yes, we are going to dissect.
Yes,
I promise. And just to answer the question, what kept me going? The story that you tell about the lab coat. When I was a car guard, I worked in a place called South Beach. Now that's where the old Smith Street ends. Yeah? And if you stand where Smith Street ends, now it's called Anton Lembede, you can see it's a very long street, very straight, and you can see the other side of the city. There's a hill and then there is a tower. And just like your lab coat, before I put on my jacket as a car guard, I used to stay at that tower and say, I'm here today, but I am coming.
Sure.
And I stayed at that tower so many times. And that tower is the Howard College Tower of the University of Natal.
Wow. Wow.
And so this is to say the happening of today may include failure, may include disappointment. The happening of today, I am now absolutely convinced that they have nothing to do with what tomorrow will be. And I'm saying it knowing that there's a huge spectrum of experiences in that way. And so what will happen tomorrow, we don't know. That's the truth, because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. Sure. But there is something, I was telling my team today, that there is something you can know about tomorrow. And that you can know about tomorrow is what you want out of it. What you want tomorrow. And if you make it a desire and a deep desire, you are already contributing to what tomorrow will be. And then it will be what it will be. Because it's the future. It has not happened yet. And so if you fail one course, it does not mean you will not be an expert in that very subject.
Right.
Actually, I mean, many of you would have seen, people who say, I kept trying, and now they are the most respected people in those fields. Right? But in the moment, it's painful. It is difficult. And one of the ways that I remind myself, it is to say, today I am here. Tomorrow, I don't know. What is it that I want? What do I want? And it's really, really important that we practice that. University is a place where you're supposed to practice these things.
Absolutely.
Your substance is, I'm going to pass that course tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you fail it, then what do you want tomorrow? Yeah. And when you leave university, it's going to be something else. Your professional life, you'll create companies, you will be trusted with big projects. Some will fail, some will succeed. But then what do you want after that? A lot of it really is up to you. And finally, those of you who have ambitions to write, because I really believe in storytelling.
Yes.
And I think we should write our own stories.
Yes.
It took me a long time to decide where to start, because I didn't know where to start.
Right.
And I actually managed to do that because I let go precisely of that demand on me that I have to start somewhere.
Wow.
I just had to start. And as I started, I got anxious. I was thinking, I have to say this in a particular way. Am I really going to convey what I mean here? I have to tell it in a particular way. And the writing became a lot more fulfilling for me when I let go of the notion that there is a particular way I have to do it. And so I would say, write. It's like you're putting rubble somewhere that contains diamond. And that diamond, you won't find it unless the rubble is there. And at some point, you're going to reach out and pull it out and present it to the world. And so do it. And do it to the best of your ability, because that is actually the best, irrespective of what anyone else says. And that's actually, I'm really looking forward to reading many more stories from us, because it is our story. And to everybody, one of the reasons this book is called Witnessing is because it's an invitation to witness. Once you put it out there, it is no longer just your story. It is our story now. And like Prof said, what it will become, it will become. International, local, all of that, it will become. Because once you let it go, it is no longer just our story, your story. It is our story. It's the story of our humanity, because that's what it is all about. It's our humanity.
Really powerful. Very, very powerful words there. And what I'm learning, and this became probably the closing theme of the entire conversation in the entire panel discussion, is that in as much as success is recognized individually, the pursuit of success is very much dependent on collective effort. In as much as the recognition of our own existence and humanity is very much contingent on the humanity of others. So I think as we're speaking about stories and telling stories, as we think about our own stories, think about the other people's stories that exist around you that make your story exist. That make your story as colorful as it is today, that intermesh into a singular destiny that depends on everyone else around you. That success, it's all of our success. So thank you so much, Mr. Pie-Pacifique, for really unpacking your story and giving us an opportunity to witness right? What you went through. It's like the same thing, right? Because that's what you came here and did. You're like, okay, cool. This is my story. Heard your story. This is my story, right? And Prof. Zondi, thank you so much for being the teacher that you are in helping us contextualize all of these notions, all of these stories, helping us to read these stories, right? Because sometimes you need someone to help you commentate on what you're witnessing, what you're watching, etc. And from my side, I'd like to thank you guys also, because this panel discussion, which is our theme right now, would not exist without you. We did this for you, right? And we did this all together, so it was a participatory process. So I'd like to invite someone from, I believe from the UJ Transformation Unit to do a vote of thanks officially. But otherwise, from my side, Thami Pooe, it's been an absolute honor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to our facilitator. Your passion and the manner in which you drove the conversation was absolutely beautiful. I think you said a lot already. I wouldn't want to repeat some of the things that were said. Thank you, Sakile. We wish you all the best with your book, and we look forward to reading that book. Thank you, Professor Spamandla. Indeed, you are into Pie-Pacifique. Thank you for taking that seed for us to want to share today, the library, all our